Debbie, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast with me here. I greatly appreciate it. Since the time I got to meet you a few months ago down in Columbia at the USA women's basketball practice there with Dawn Staley. And it's just amazing how fast time goes that we're already into college basketball right now. But you're also 31 years into covering college basketball and calling games. So after 31 years, does it even still feel like work to you, or are you just fully enjoying it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. And no, I don't think I've worked a day in my life. I feel so lucky to have the job I have, and I'm very fortunate. My timing has always felt like it's been good, and I'm very excited about my 31st season on the air calling college basketball.
Well, I know you have to be, and I'm right there with you in terms of just when you are able to talk sports, talk about basketball, as basketball is my passion as well, it definitely makes time go by even faster. But let's walk back through your journey then, before you got into calling games and before you were a star at NC State under legendary coach Yao there. How did you gravitate towards sports growing up, and when did basketball become a passion of yours?
Well, I'm the oldest of three girls. My dad was quite an athlete in high school. My mom was a cheerleader. My parents were terrific parents and still are today in raising the three of us to not be quitters. No matter what we tried, and we tried everything, we had to play it out. Whether it was tap dancing or Girl Scouts, things that I didn't want to do, but my sister, who was a year younger than me, did. I did those and tried them, and I didn't like them, and my mother would never let me quit. She made me stick it out. So I dabbled in a lot of different things, but the first team that I was on was a Little League baseball team. There were not options for girls in the town that I lived in Hyde Park, New York, and I tried out for Little League. I was good enough to be able to play. I could lay down a bunt, and I played second base when I was 10 years old, and I played for 3 years in the summers, and I loved it. And then I played some CYO basketball through the church league in the town that we lived in. But it wasn't until I was going into the 8th grade when my parents moved us from Hyde Park, New York to Cary, North Carolina, that I had gone over to NC State, and I saw these college women playing basketball in college and playing at a very high level, and there was this thing called a scholarship that you could get if you were good enough.
That's right.
And when I learned about that, that's when I decided and made up my mind. While I played everything, I played volleyball and softball in high school as well. And, of course, I worked out, so I ran a lot, and I played tennis, and, I played everything growing up. But when I saw that and had that experience at NC State, that's when I made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do.
And what was that like, though, when you're out there early on, when you talk about being on the baseball team, Little League baseball team, and you're a female in a male-dominated, obviously, sport? Was that transition tough, or did you have a tough time fitting in, so to speak?
Well, there was no question. There was one other girl that was in the league who happened to be on my team. And so there were two of us, which was very odd to have any girls in the league, right? Because there weren't any girls playing. It was all boys. I do have very strong memories of things like me standing in a batter's box and the guys throwing at me. I do have very vivid memories of playing out in the field and people from the stands yelling, "Get that girl out of here, she doesn't belong." I did play in the Little League All-Star game, so I was very good. So I was capable of playing at a high level with the boys, equally with the boys at that time. And I remember hearing those things, but remember, I was never allowed to quit. So I think my resolve was, back then, my resilience was sort of formed that, this is something I like to do, and this is what I want to do, and there's no reason why I can't be doing it. I don't ever remember having conversations with my parents about, if people are yelling from the stands and you're just going to have to, decide if you're going to take it or not. I'm sure if you ask my mother, I'm sure she wasn't very pleased about listening to some of the things that she had to hear.
Of course.
And I know my dad probably didn't like it either, but I remember thinking, that's okay. I'm just going to prove them wrong, that I do belong.
Did that give you the motivation to prove people wrong because you're hearing those type of things? And is that something that's carried on throughout your life, trying to prove people wrong if they doubted you?
I think it helped shape a lot of my resolve, my attitude, my fortitude, my mental toughness, which are all things and attributes that I consider to be positives for me. You can't work in a male-dominated sport your whole life and not develop some of those, and have some people that are critical. But I'll be honest with you, yes, all of those experiences absolutely helped shape and form my attitude, not so much my career path, but maybe my attitude or my belief that I could. And today, 31 years into broadcasting, working for ESPN and CBS, my attitude right now is I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to improve. So I feel like I've come full circle on all of that.
Well, that's an interesting perspective from that standpoint. And when you're going through this journey, playing all of these different things, not allowed to quit, was there something that just fit for you in terms of basketball? You realized you're really good and then the love came, or was it the love came for basketball and then you realized how good you were?
I think I love the game. I love playing. So I loved being on a team. I loved all the aspects of teammates. I loved being on playing and competing at the highest level. I wanted to be the best that I could be. I remember being driven with all those attributes when I was younger, and I loved playing everything. And I was fortunate enough that my high school friends, which are still my dear friends today, we all sort of moved from one sport to another and picked up a few other people along the way while we were going from season to season. And we just had a good group that loved to compete. And, there's a lot of tough dynamics with the socialization of the female athlete at times. And I recognize those as I'm older. But I think I just love to play, and I saw that I could play at a high level, and I competed, and I knew that if I worked hard enough that I might have a chance. I knew when I was in high school that if I became a really good shooter, somebody was going to have to take me on their team, that I was not going to be denied. I might lack some other things. I might not be the tallest or the fastest, but I will be the hardest worker. I will be in the best shape. I will be the best shooter, and those things that are things that I can control.
And when you talk about that hard working, what did that look like for you before you got to NC State to try to showcase your talents and improve? What type of training did you do in terms of getting better?
I went back then. I didn't get to play summer travel ball, so there wasn't the AAU wasn't there when I was coming up, so that wasn't an option for me. So I worked out. I ran. I worked on drills. I went to camps. Back then, basketball camps were learning the fundamentals of the game, and so you got skill work, and then you would go home and practice. And I chased the basketball down the driveway. I didn't have a rebounder, a shot coach, a nutritionist. I didn't have a strength coach. I didn't have all those things. And so I worked out on my own. I ran. I lifted weights. I went in the gym. I tried to figure things out. I asked people for help. I asked the guys in the weight room, what am I supposed to do? I tried to figure it out. I had a teammate that was a really good track athlete. And so I'm like, I need to get my mile time down. What are the things I want to do? Would you come out and help me? Would you time me? And I remember doing those things. I also remember my dad coming home from work, or my mom and dad both coming home from work. And I'd say, hey, Dad, I ran whatever, and I got it in this time. And he'd be like, that's great. Good job. Now, somebody got a better time than you today. And I'd be like, all right, you're probably right, but wow, look what I did. And he's like, that's okay, it's good, but you could probably do better. So nothing was ever like, you were ever completely satisfied. There was always something more, or there was one more rep, or one other, run that you could make, or maybe you could run, another mile. There was always something more.
And so it was always this quest for being pushed sounds like in your family, that your parents not only wouldn't allow you to quit, but they also tried to push you each and every time out there.
That's exactly right. And like I said, my parents are terrific, and they're great role models for me as a parent, and they're terrific grandparents. And those values that they helped instill in all the three of us, my two sisters, are things that we, push forward on our own children. I want my kids to compete. I want them to work hard, but I'm not going to be interjecting with their coaches. I'm not going to be that parent that calls and says, hey, how come my kid's not playing, or what does my kid need to do better? That's the accountability on my own kids. If they want to be better, they need to ask. If my son wants to get more playing time, he needs to work harder. That's the way I grew up. That's what I think, and I think any parent who's doing the opposite is doing a disservice to their child for their total well-being.
Agreed, and I think there's an aspect that, unfortunately, you have to have a situation where sometimes your kids are going to fail, and they have to learn from that failure rather than the parents coming in there and trying to always rescue them.
We all fail. I make mistakes every day, but I have to be accountable for the choices I make. I have to be responsible for trying to fix them. I have to know what I did wrong, and I have to learn from it. If somebody is always cleaning up my mess, I'm not going to learn anything.
Of course. And you mentioned the socialization of female athletics, because you came at a time really before the explosion of women athletics per se. So describe that. What do you mean by that?
I just mean, we don't really ever talk about the female alpha on the team, but we have no problem talking about the male alpha on a team. And so that would mean, here's the guy, he's the go-to guy, he gets all the attention, he wants to take the last shot, he's the person that is grown up to believe that those are things that he can do. But on the women's side, we don't always do that. It's more, let's get along, let's pass the ball, let's make sure it's an equal opportunity. I don't think the coaches on the women's side on Division I level think that that's probably the way that they want their athletes to come to them. I think they'd rather have their athletes be good teammates, but also have the confidence and the experience of being the go-to. When you look at Notre Dame, for example, in women's college basketball, winning the national championship last year, is there any question who the alpha is on that team?
No.
Right? But we don't talk about Arike Gumbawale like that, but we should. Because she deserves to be talked about like that, and she can handle it. Anything you throw at her, she can handle.
Agreed. And to that point, there's always the debate in terms of men's basketball for the who's the GOAT from the alpha male perspective, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. But what about from the women's side, from your perspective? To that point, who would you categorize as some of the all-time greats in women's college basketball that could fill that alpha role?
I think, I think certainly Ann Myers and Cheryl Miller, to go back to UCLA and USC. Those would be two women that would come to my mind immediately for everything they've accomplished in our game, at such a high level at an early time. Cheryl Miller was one of the greatest players in the history of our game. There were a lot of people that would have a tough time defending her. She could do everything before 6'3", was away from the basket and handling out front and knocking down perimeter jump shots. I think, of course, Diana Taurasi is arguably one of the all-time greats. There's no question she might be the best winner we've ever had in the history of our game. I don't know if anybody's won more than her unless you're putting Sue Bird in that category. So, Candace Parker, I think, is a player that a lot of tall women model their game after. At 6'5", the things that she can do away from the basket. I think in the women's college basketball game that, we're still just like the guys, the stretch four, the space, the spread offenses, bigs handling away from the bucket, more of a European style look. I feel like we've been doing that for a while on the women's side. Those are some names that come to mind when I think about some of the all-time greats, and I know I probably left off a handful of them, but when you look at who's in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame and the last class, Tina Thompson and Katie Smith, you can go right through the list for players, Dawn Staley, Cynthia Cooper, Cheryl Swoops. I mean, there's a whole generation of players that helped the WNBA really launch. And now we're looking for that next generation of players to carry us forward.
Agreed. And from my perspective, I wish there was more video and film of Cheryl Miller, because I don't think people give her enough credit. That's just my opinion. I think she's the GOAT, and she was way ahead of her time.
Well, I played against her in college, and I had never seen anybody like her. She was 6'3", long and athletic. She could do everything with a basketball. She defended at a high level, and she even dunked. And she competed against her brother, Reggie Miller. Most people know about how great he was.
Yes.
Well, Reggie will tell you the best player in the household in high school was Cheryl.
I believe it. So what was your experience then when you played against her? Were people somewhat mesmerized as you're out there trying to play against her?
Well, I mean, I think she was just ahead of her time. You know, if she was playing in the WNBA, she would have been a player that everyone would have had as a household name. She was just able to do things like a guy, and that's totally meant as a compliment because of her athleticism and her length.
Of course. So for your college career, as you see those women at NC State after you moved to Cary, North Carolina, so was there any question that you were going to go to NC State once it came time to go play basketball?
Well, you know, I was fortunate enough to get some offers around the state of North Carolina, really nothing that great outside. But I had been to camps. I had put my focus on studying the NC State players, studying K-Yao, going to camp and learning. And that was my dream, that my wish and dream, my work, everything I focused on and visualized was me playing at NC State. I sat on the railing right across from the bench on the first row and watched the games while I was in middle school and high school, and that's what I wanted to do. And I made up my mind that was what I was going to do. I was going to do everything to make sure that I had an opportunity and I could control the things that I could control. Ironically, I had an offer from North Carolina and from NC State. I was trying to decide between the two. NC State had said to me that they were moving in another direction, that they were going to recruit someone else. And so North Carolina had, at that time, I had a scholarship offer. And the scholarship had some papers that went with it that you would sign and send back. But the papers were getting ready to expire. And as those papers were getting ready to expire from the University of North Carolina, I got a call from NC State, and Coach Al had reached back to me to say that the person that they were recruiting had decided to go somewhere else, and now they were interested in me again. Well, my feelings were so hurt. I mean, my ego was so bruised, that they didn't want me, and now they want me again, and I've got this chance to go to North Carolina. And so it was a little troublesome for me. I remember going to high school in Cary, North Carolina, which is situated between Raleigh and Chapel Hill. My high school, I remember in the high school hallways, and I'd have people chanting NC State and other people telling me to go to North Carolina. So it had a little bit of a challenge for me, but it was a classic conversation between Coach Al and myself when I was in the spring of my senior year, and she pretty much got on the phone, and anybody that knows her would know, I'm like, well, first you don't want me, now you want me, and she's like, Debbie, haven't you always dreamed about playing here? Haven't you gone to my camps? Isn't this what you set your mind on? Why would you not come here? And I was like, yes, you're right. And I decided that's how we committed back in that day. That wasn't like,
yes, that's right.
The TV show up and I've got two baseball hats under the table and I'm going to pull one out. That's not what we did.
No, it's definitely not. I would have loved to have seen you do that, though. That would have been priceless.
Well, it was one of the best decisions of my life to have a 4-year experience with her as one of her players, but really my relationship with her was 30 years, from being a recruited athlete, being a camper, playing for her, and then, of course, professionally my career. Yeah, and also representing her fund.
Of course, and I was going to ask you just the impact that she's had on your life. Obviously, it carries far beyond basketball, I should say. So what type of legacy has she left you in terms of what she's been able to provide you in so many different ways?
I don't usually speak for other Wolfpack women, when I say this, but I feel confident that other people in the many decades that she coached there would all feel the same way. We loved her. We would do whatever she asked us to do. We never wanted to disappoint her. She wasn't a yeller or a screamer. She was a teacher. And she got her message across that way by her relationships with each of us individually and the way she communicated it. And I'm saying all this while I'm staring at a picture of her in my office. It's a collage of pictures of her coaching that actually hung in her office that I bought at an auction, because I remember going to meet with her in her office, and this picture was one that was right in my line of sight every time I sat down to talk to her. And so when I see this picture, I think about all the wonderful things that she helped me as a young woman, and all of her influence in my many roles that I play, whether it's mom or wife or broadcaster or daughter or sister or anything that I do. Coach Al was a wonderful person, and we all really feel blessed to have had the privilege to play for her.
Yes. And when you got to NC State, though, was there a little bit of an eye-opening experience in terms of this is college basketball, this is a new reality for you?
Yes, I couldn't even bench the 45-pound bar in the weight room. So I thought Coach Al was going to redshirt me because I couldn't make the cross-court pass as crisp as she wanted it. And I thought, well, but I can shoot it. And so everything that I did in every drill, tried to position myself offensively to prove to her that I, was a good offensive player, that the rest of it will come. I will get stronger, and, I will be a good, coachable teammate. We did have a conversation about it, but thankfully she decided not to. So my freshman year, I played. This is one of my favorite stories about playing at NC State. I played in every game that we played in that year, except the 2 times that we played the University of North Carolina. Oh. And so, as for someone knowing the past story that I just gave you about making my decision between the 2,
exactly.
There was nobody that I wanted to play against more. And we're playing North Carolina at home in Raleigh. There's about 5,000 people there. North Carolina and us were both ranked. We're both very good. I'm on the end of the bench. There's about 5 minutes left in the game. And the short version of this is we had a 6'7" player. You weren't supposed to give her the ball on the move. Somebody gave it to her. She got fouled. The officials didn't call it. I jumped up on the end of the bench, and I yelled foul. Well, the 2 people on each side of me stood up as well. But the official across the court, and there were only 2 officials then, blew the whistle and made the technical foul sign and went over to the scorer's table to report it. Well, Coach Al was looking at this official like, well, who's the foul? What are you calling? What is going on? The 3 of us sit back down, and I'm thinking to myself, there is no way that this is a technical foul on me. And the official walks by Coach Al, comes down to me. I have my shooting shirt on. Remember, I hadn't been in the game. Couldn't see my number, and he says, what's your number? Oh. And I said, 12. And at that point, I'm thinking, please don't cry. And I'm in big trouble. My dad is going to kill me. And I don't know what Coach Al was going to do, but I thought I was going to be in big trouble. And the best part of the story is that the next day, we don't practice. So she has no conversation with me. The following day, we're going to watch film. And before we go to watch film, I go to her office and I asked her if I could speak to her. And this is January, I believe it's January of my freshman year. So, I've only been on campus a few months. I'm still young. And I said, Coach Al, I just want to let you know, all I said was foul. I didn't say anything else. And she said, what seemed like was about 20 minutes of conversation as I shrunk in the couch. I don't think you could even see me by the time she got done. The couch had swallowed me up. But she said, for me to have a freshman on the end of the bench that didn't get in the game, and I knew what that game meant to you, and that, you were that involved and that emotionally engaged in what was happening, she said, I'll take that any day, just please don't get another technical. And instead, I thought she was going to say, bring your shoes, meet me at the track. I thought all these things were going to happen to me for punishment, but she knew me. She had a relationship with me. And because she knew that this would bother me more than anything that she could ever do to me, she decided that just by talking to me, that would be enough. And I like to say today that I try to use 3 power words that help me in every decision that I make in any aspect of my life. My 3 power words are build, serve, and empower. And build and serve are 2 things that I think she embodied all the time, and I use those as power words to help me. And it also allowed me to have this one claim to fame that no one at NC State has, and I hope that no one will ever have, and that is a player getting a technical foul from the bench, but also allowing me to coin and self-proclaim I am the best non-stat starter in NC State history.
That's right.
I started for 3 years, and I have very little stat to show for it.
Well, you're comical as well, but obviously it sounded like, to your point, what you described Coach Yao as a teacher, she knew that that was a teaching moment for you rather than a moment just to go get punished. And have you think about it in those terms?
There's no question that's the wisdom and her experience in dealing with young women. And she knew that somehow she must have known that that experience alone would catapult me into other things and give me a chance to share that story so that I can help teach other people and take advantage of the lessons that I learned from her.
Yeah. Now, did you get any more technical fouls?
Not as a player at NC State, no.
Okay. So where else did...
I only have one other technical foul, Richmond, and that was I shamefully hate to say it was in a rec league basketball game coaching one of my son's teams.
Well, that's just that competitive spirit coming out, right, Coach?
Exactly.
So after your playing career is over at NC State, you graduate, had you been thinking about being in broadcasting? How did that come about?
Broadcasting was not even anywhere blip on my radar. I loved sport. I wanted to stay in the game. I didn't think I was good enough to go overseas. There wasn't a professional league here. Now I wish I had known. I mean, anybody can go overseas and play. I could have gone overseas to play. My game would have been good enough, but I didn't think it was at that time because I didn't have enough knowledge. And so there was a gentleman named Kevin O'Connell who was an assistant AD at NC State. Coach Yao told me to go see him because he had graduated from this place called Ohio University, and he had a master's in sports administration. And I thought that sounds like something that might be interesting to me. So I went to see Kevin. Kevin is currently at the University of South Carolina. He's an associate AD under Ray Tanner. But I went to see Kevin, and he handed me this directory of alumni and names and jobs of people that have gone through the Ohio University program. It is the #1 graduate school program in the country in sports ad. It has been for decades. And I went through the book and read all the jobs, and I decided that that is something that I wanted to do. And I put my mind on becoming an athletic director at that time. So I went to grad school, was a graduate assistant, had a couple of opportunities to coach, decided that I wanted to pursue being an AD, external operations from marketing and fundraising and ticket sales and all that was more my personality than sports information was, or internal things like business and finance. So that's what I started on a path towards, and broadcasting just happened to be an opportunity that came about.
And when you say just came about, so what was that like then? I mean, did somebody just say, here, put some headsets on, and we know you know college basketball, so talk about it? How did it happen?
It was November of 1988. I was at the University of Kentucky. I was the director of marketing in the athletic department. I was the first director of marketing. People would not believe that in the late 80s, there were a lot of athletic departments that didn't even have that department yet. It was still evolving, sponsorship and marketing. And, you know, we didn't have synergy and branding and all those things back then. It was so different. We had a local cable company that came to us at Kentucky and said, hey, we think we can produce sport. And we said, well, if you think you can produce sport, how would you like to try a women's basketball game? And they said we would. And so we allowed them to produce and broadcast basketball games. And my boss at the time said, Debbie, do you want to try to do the game? And I was like, what do you mean do the game? He's like, be the color, be the analyst. I said, yeah, I'd love to. And that's how I got started. And it was kind of like hitting that sweet 9-iron right right on the flag. It's just one of those things that once you feel what that feels like, and for me, the prep, the study, the film, the on the floor, the game day, the prep, the strategy, all of it was the same as coaching. It was a different avenue than coaching, and you didn't have to deal with the players. And I thought this was pretty cool to complement what I was doing. And it just ended up becoming a focal point of my career.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have enough of those sweet 9-iron shots that you're describing that hit right at the flag. I need to keep working on my game there, Debbie. I'm struggling on that aspect. But when you talk about now that love that you had and it just felt natural to you. So how long was it before you made the decision, I'm going all in on broadcasting. I'm no longer going to go this route of potentially, athletic director position, that broadcasting was where you wanted to go?
So I spent 8 years in collegiate marketing, 4 at Kentucky as a director of marketing, and 4 at The Ohio State University as a director of marketing. So I've been at 2 really good places with 2 outstanding brands. And all along the way, I had still kept my mind on becoming an athletic director, and I was broadcasting games. And when I got to Ohio State, I went to the local cable company and I said, can you produce sport? They said, we don't know. I said, well, I want you to try. Tell me what it would cost to produce 8 women's basketball games in St. John Arena. And they came back with a number. I can't even remember what it was. So I always say it was like $50,000. It wasn't, certainly what the costs are today. And I went out and I sold $50,000 worth of advertising. So I created an inventory package, created a TV network, if you will, because we did syndicate our games past 1 affiliate. As a director of marketing, I was capable of doing that, and it also fulfilled my desire to stay on the air calling games. So it allowed me to do both at the same time, and it worked out great for me that we had a local cable company that had some interest in doing it, and I was able to do the games. And I did that until our first son was born. And after our first son was born, at that time, that's when I decided that I think I want to try broadcasting full time.
And how often are you on the road? I mean, is it how many days, how many months? I know it's a lot. So how is that life on the road, so to speak?
Well, because I have 3 children and I don't want to lose my Mother of the Year status, I try not to say exactly how much I'm gone. But, basketball has evolved into 365, 24/7 for me. I made a decision early in my career not to work on other sports just because I knew how much I loved basketball and I wanted to work that angle. And other sports would never allow me to be home at all. So I'm gone quite a bit. I mean, I was recently reading a story about some broadcasters that were laying out, some of the toughest stretches that they've ever had calling games. I mean, I've had stretches where I've had 14 games and 15 nights in 14 different states. I've had stretches where I've done 2 games on the same day in 2 different states, one in Ohio, one in upstate New York. I've done 2 games on the same day on the men's side at one at North Carolina and at Duke. Which, I've had some incredible opportunity to work. And I feel very fortunate that I've had this much opportunity. When I was first starting in my career, ESPN was doing about 80 women's college games, and I was doing 80 by myself. So without working full-time for ESPN. So I've really worked hard to create a network. I've done this without an agent. I've never had an agent. I think everybody today has one. I don't know if anyone at my level is working without an agent, but I felt strongly about not having one because I built the relationships myself through my 2 stops at Kentucky and Ohio State.
How do you juggle everything then? I mean, from family to job. I mean, you're your own self-promoter. You don't have an agent. How do you prioritize things in your life?
Well, I'm not interested in finding a day off. I look for quality time with my family when I'm home. I work really hard and stay focused on the amount of time I need for work. I just have a great husband who helps me figure it out. I have three boys that really understand what I do. They don't know it any other way. This is the way they've always known it because this is the way they've grown up. And we just figure it out. There are times when I wish I had an assistant. If you saw what my office looked like, you would see why I would need one. But it's a love for the game. It's a passion for the people that are in the game, and that's on the men and the women's side. That's not just the women. I feel very fortunate to do what I get to do.
When did it happen, or if it did, as you mentioned, your three boys have just known you in this role basically their whole life. So was there a moment when they came to the realization that Mom's a big deal? She's one of the most well-known college basketball analysts and WNBA analysts out there?
None of my guys ever think about me like that.
You're just Mom.
I've had a couple of moments where I remember my oldest son was in middle school and he came home one day and he said, "Mom, did you interview Tyler Hansbrough for North Carolina last night?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." "You interviewed Tyler Hansbrough?" I said, "Yeah, I interviewed him after the game." "Well, because the guys were talking about it at lunch, and they thought that was really cool that they saw you doing the interview." And I went, "Yeah, well, Joey, that's what I do." And he's like, "Wow." It lasted about 2 minutes because then I asked him to take the trash out, and then I had to ask him 5 times.
Exactly. Then he's ignoring you at that point, right? He's got selective hearing.
Any parent would know that your kids are the ones that really truly keep you humble. You can't get too high or too low. They don't really care, about all that. They just want to know, that you're taking care of them and providing for them what they need. But no, I've got 3 great boys, and my husband's terrific too. So we call it Team Antonelli in every aspect of what we do.
Of course. And you mentioned, what we talked about previously in terms of wanting to prove people wrong. And you've been able to call men's college basketball games, which there's not many females that have done that. So did you ever have pushback when you first started calling men's games that people didn't think that you could do it?
Of course. And still today, if you follow social media, I'm sure you can see there's a lot of people that think that women shouldn't be on any male sport for some reason. I don't know why they feel that strongly about it. But, I like to say, you can criticize my voice or you can criticize something about, my opinion or whatever. But if you want to start talking about pick and roll and breaking the game down, you want to start talking about running the Princeton offense, or you want to dive into any of that, well, bring it on. Bring it. But if you just want to talk about you don't think that women should be calling men's games, then you don't have a good reason. I just sort of dismiss that. I have no place for that. But I will say this, 2017, when CBS called me and asked me if I could work the men's tournament as an analyst. I had worked the men's tournament in the past, in the 90s, as a reporter. But that was a long time ago, and I didn't even know CBS was considering me for that role. While I have worked for them for 20-plus years, I didn't know that they would think of me in that role. And this is probably one of the downsides of not having an agent. So I didn't have anybody sitting, at the table talking to them about, why wouldn't you consider Debbie? I think they had been considering me for a while, but I just didn't know it. And when they called me and asked me, I had to get permission from ESPN. ESPN was, of course, excited and thrilled for me. It went all the way up the chain through the management, and the management team came back with, of course, a yes. And 2017 was a really interesting year for women in sport. I don't know if a lot of people have looked at it this way, but, Doris Burke got the NBA gig. After I got the CBS gig, Beth Mowins got the CBS play-by-play and the Monday Night Football for ESPN. Those 2 things opened up for her. Jess Mendoza had been doing Sunday Night Baseball, I think, the year before. So that is, was still somewhat new. And then there was a young woman who had gotten the lead analyst position on Fox for some World Cup soccer. So there were a lot of things happening, and they all seemed to happen at the same time. And, the first year on CBS, it was a big deal media-wise. I had the New York Times photographer was in my house for an hour and a half following me around, which I thought was really interesting since I've been working in the men's game since the mid-'90s. But then last year, there were only 1 or 2 articles written about me doing the game. So I felt like that was actually a step forward.
Yes, it was. And I know nobody can question your knowledge of the game of basketball. There's no doubt about that. And speaking of knowledge, as we wrap up here, you've already shared some of your power words, but what about any other words of wisdom, Debbie, that has meant a lot to you that you'd like to share? And it could be any other phrases, quotes, mottos, or just life advice.
Well, I want to say this because this is a big part of who I am and helps shape my decisions and my power words. I did mention I have 3 boys. My middle son, Frankie, is a student at Clemson University in the LIFE program. LIFE stands for Learning is for Everyone. He's my middle son. He's 21, and he has Down syndrome. When he was born, no one ever believed, and certainly we didn't, that college would even be an option. For anybody with intellectual disability, post-secondary options weren't available, and now they are, and they're popping up all over the country. And I think about the journey that we've had with our son through some very challenging times. Fortunately, he's healthy, but a lot of people see him and they don't believe. They say he can't and he won't and he doesn't. And I think they're judging a book by its cover. So I would alert everyone to really think about 2 things that I think about involving my son. And one of them is, don't judge a book by its cover. The other is, you really don't know anything about somebody until you walk a mile in their shoes. Those are 2 old cliches that are very prevalent in my life, and I think about the things that and decisions that we've made and how we've raised our boys, especially how we've gone about with Team Antonelli around my son Frankie, and he is an incredible success. And there was a lot of advocacy and a lot of push, but there were a lot of people that didn't believe, but I always believed. And so I'm a very strong advocate for him, and I would encourage people out there that see someone that might look a little different or they haven't absolutely accepted adversity or diversity or inclusion, then I think they need to take a strong look in the mirror about trying to be kind to everyone. But for those that are working and from a professional standpoint, for me, like I said before, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to improve, and that's the way I go about my day. And those are the things that I think about right now besides Bill Servin and Power.
Well said, and I'm a big advocate of the Clemson Life program. I'm a Clemson grad. My son is a freshman at Clemson right now as well, so we've got that in common, and I couldn't agree with you more in terms of it's a great program and it just allows people to see from a different lens that a lot of these individuals can do things, and obviously you're preaching that with the Team Antonelli, I should say, because it seems like it's in your DNA. You're not allowed to quit if you're an Antonelli. And so, Debbie, I can't thank you enough, though, for letting me harass you and steal some of your time and just learning a little bit more about your journey. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be interested, Richmond, and for making time yourself to hear a little bit about my story. I hope there's somebody out there that it helps.